We're now in public session, members, and we are now going to move now to item number 5 on the agenda, which is your draft minutes. Can I refer members to the draft minutes of proceedings at pages 145 to 157 of your meeting pack? Are members content that the draft minutes of the meeting of the 26th of February 2026 are a true reflection of proceedings? Content? Thank you, members. Move on to item number 6. Matters arising. There are no matters arising, so we'll swiftly move on to item number 7, which is Regulation EU 2026-471 as regards certain market rules and sectoral support measures in the wine sector and for aromatised wine products. And just to inform members that this item will be recorded by Hansard. So can I refer members to the relevant papers at pages 8 to 76 of your meeting pack? Members, on the 26th of June, having considered legal advice and departmental oral evidence, the committee decided to monitor the proposal of this EU Act. Details of the committee's consideration of the proposal, including consideration of the provisionally agreed text, can be found at page 9 and 10 of your meeting pack. An assessment of impact from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs on the published EU Act can be found at pages 69 to 75 of your meeting pack. An explanatory memorandum on the published Act has not yet been received. When received, it will be included in a future meeting for members to consider. However, the explanatory memorandum on the proposed Act can be found at page 54 of the meeting pack. Can I remind members that the committee will need to take a decision on whether to hold an inquiry into this published replacement EU Act, and will do so following the evidence session. So can I very much welcome Samantha Swan, Head of Poultry, Meats, Eggs, Dairy, Hops, Hemp, Wines and Spirits Policy Branch from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, and Dr. Samantha Stewart, who's Head of Food Security, Beef, Sheep and Pig Policy from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. So just whenever you are both ready, if you would like to present to the committee, and thank you for attending this morning.
Good morning. My name is Samantha Swan and I am Head of Poultry, Meat, Eggs, Dairy, Wine, Spirits, Hops and Hemp Policy Branch, and I'm accompanied by my colleague Samantha Stewart, who is Head of Food Security, Beef, Pigs, Sheep Policy Branch, which supports DEFRA as competent authority on geographical indications with advice from a Northern Ireland perspective. Thank you for the opportunity to brief the committee on the EU Regulation 2026-471, which amends certain market rules and sectoral support measures in the wine sector and for aromatised wine products, and certain labelling rules for spirit drinks. This Act was adopted on the 24th of February 2026, published in the Official Journal on the 26th of January 2026, and most elements will enter into force 20 days after publication on the 18th of March 2026, with some exemptions, particularly in relation to some elements that apply directly in Northern Ireland, which I will explain in due course. I understand the committee has already received a copy of DERA's impact assessment of the proposed regulation, and DEFRA are updating their explanatory memorandum following the publication of the Act. The proposal for this regulation was published on the 28th of March 2025, following recommendations made by the High-Level Group on Wine Policy. The High-Level Group was established to discuss challenges and identify possible opportunities for the union wine sector. The union wine sector is facing significant crisis, driven by a steady decline in wine consumption, both within the Union and globally. Geopolitical factors and the effects of climate change have worsened the situation, and excess production has put pressure on prices, leaving wine growers with less capital to invest and no financial reserves to weather severe events. After 4 meetings, the group endorsed a document with policy recommendations in December 2024. The recommendations were broadly welcomed by stakeholders and by MEPs in the meeting of the Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development on the 13th of January 2025. Officials appeared before the committee to present an initial assessment of impact on the proposals for these wine sector regulations on the 26th of June 2025, and at this meeting the committee made a decision to monitor the proposed replacement EU Act and requested the Department provide a revised assessment of impact if any changes to the Act are proposed by the Council of the EU or the European Parliament which would have a significant impact specific to the everyday life of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. Subject to the democratic mechanisms within the Windsor framework, the amendments to Regulation No. 1308 of 2013 will amend rules on the production of lower alcohol wine to improve arrangements for the production of low alcohol sparkling wine, introduce rules to harmonise the use of terms to describe lower alcohol wine, and other rules concerning the label of wine, and to permit the Commission to come forward with proposals to harmonise rules on the electronic labelling via VR code of ingredients and nutrition information in wine. Subject to the democratic mechanisms contained within the Windsor framework, the amendments to Regulation No. 251 of 2014 will permit the production and marketing of lower alcohol aromatised wine products, bringing them in line for rules in reduced alcohol and alcohol-free labelling of wine, and permit the Commission to come forward with proposals to harmonise the rules on electronic labelling via QR code of ingredients and nutrition information on aromatised wine. The updates to marketing standards for wine and aromatised wine are relevant to Northern Ireland, although officials anticipate that any impact will be small. This EU Act amends and harmonises the rules on how low alcohol wine products are labelled. The aim is to give consumers clear information and support the growing market for reduced alcohol products. Under new regulations, wine and aromatised wine with an alcohol content of no more than 0.5% alcohol by volume must be described as alcohol-free. If the alcohol content does not exceed 0.05%, this is accompanied by 0.0% on the label, and the legislation includes the term reduced alcohol for products where the actual alcoholic strength of the product is above 0.5% by volume and is at least 30% below the minimum actual alcoholic strength in the products in the category before dealcoholisation. The term reduced alcohol replaces earlier proposals of alcohol light and low alcohol, and for clarification, the impact assessment you were provided incorrectly used the term low alcohol, and this should have been reduced alcohol. There is a lead-in time of 18 months for these new requirements relating to reduced alcohol content and their labelling, and wine products which have undergone dealcoholisation and been labelled before the end of this period may be continued to be placed on the market until existing stocks are exhausted. Wines placed on the market in Northern Ireland are already required under EU law to show information on nutrition ingredients on labels directly or via e-labels as regards to ingredients. The legislation empowers the EU to harmonise arrangements for the e-labelling of wines, aromatic wines, to display nutrition and ingredient information, including by a common pictogram or symbol instead of words. Amendments to Regulation No. 2021-2115 will not apply in Northern Ireland, as this regulation does not fall under Annex 2 of the Windsor framework, and the aim of these is to allow vineyards to restructure to avoid an increase in production, permit producer groups managing protected designations of origin and geographical indications to benefit from support for developing wine tourism, and to increase investment to mitigate climate change impact. There are also some amendments under Regulation 1308 of 2013 which will not apply in Northern Ireland, and these are amendments to make it easier for Member States to address or prevent risk of surplus production capacity by allowing changes to the vine planting rights arrangements. The proposal was updated to introduce an amendment to Regulation 2024-1143, which relates to geographical indications for wine, spirit drinks and agricultural products, as well as traditional specialties guaranteed and optional quality terms for agricultural products. This new amendment removes the obligation for spirit drink GI producers to provide an indication of the name of the producer in the labelling in the same field of vision as the geographical indication. This obligation was due to take effect in May 2026. Its removal is intended to avoid disruption to established practices and imposing disproportionate burdens on operators in this sector, especially on small and medium-sized producers. No formal consultation has taken place across the UK, and due to the urgency to adopt this initiative, the European Commission did not conduct a public consultation nor an impact assessment on the amendments before they published the proposal. The costs and benefits of the initiative were assessed in a staff working document which was published in July 2025. This document notes that overall the reforms are expected to deliver net benefits with easier production methods for de-alcoholised sparkling wine and labelling harmonisation, leading to operational efficiency. On the 7th of April 2025, the Commission opened an 8-week consultation until the 2nd of June 2025 via the Have Your Say portal that UK stakeholders were able to respond to. A total of 23 responses were received by the Commission's closing date, and no responses were received from Irish stakeholders, and no responses were received from UK stakeholders. Stakeholders broadly welcomed the Commission's proposals, with very few concerns about the technical changes which will apply in Northern Ireland via Regulation 1308 of 2013 and Regulation 251 of 2014. Concerns raised from respondents included the terms used to describe low alcohol wine could be confusing or ambiguous, and several responses remarked that the term alcohol light could also be taken to refer to nutritional or sugar content. Other concerns included calls for an exemption from labelling requirements for EU wines exported to third countries, and clarification that mandatory particulars only needed to appear once in the label, and a request was made to make a clear transition to the new regulations. Feedback was presented to the European Parliament and Council, and updates which reflected the above concerns are included in the final act. On the 18th of February 2026, Have Your Say notices were issued for 6 proposed delegated and implementing regulations relating to the wine sector. These include measures setting down rules on electronic labelling of wine and aromatised wine, and additional regulations are proposed covering wine making treatments, the revisions of rules and procedures for traditional terms, and new rules for vineyard plantings. These regulations are planned for Q4 of 2026, and no further details are available at this stage. However, we will continue to monitor these proposals as they progress. DAER's assessment remains that it is not likely that the amendments would have a significant impact specific to the everyday life of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. It also remains the view of officials that it is not likely that not applying the amendments would have a significant impact specific to the everyday life of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. All wine placed in the Northern Ireland market is moved from GB or imported from the EU or the rest of the world. We do not believe the EU's technical changes to harmonise labelling arrangements will result in significant additional costs to traders, and we were previously aware of only one company operating in Northern Ireland that might bottle a wine. However, following engagement with this stakeholder, we have received confirmation that no wine bottling takes place at its Northern Ireland site. All bottling is carried out at its plants in GB. On that basis, our understanding is that all wine arrives pre-bottled from Great Britain, EU or the rest of the world. It is not considered likely that the regulation would have a significant impact on UK internal market movements. This means that qualifying goods would continue to move from Great Britain to Northern Ireland via the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme without having to meet new requirements. Products intended to be marketed in the EU or moved under non-Northern Ireland Retail Scheme arrangements to the market in Northern Ireland will need to adopt the new harmonised arrangements, but DEFRA does not anticipate this will cause major problems or add significantly to costs to NI traders. Moreover, in line with the UK Government's commitment to ensure Northern Ireland traders have unfettered access to the rest of the UK internal market, these measures would not have any impact on the movement of qualified Northern Ireland goods to Great Britain. Such goods would also continue to benefit from market access principles set out in the Internal Market Act and enjoy unfettered access. That concludes the DAER presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So members, any questions? I do have Peter first.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Samantha. When I say Samantha, it should be either of you, I suppose, today. But Samantha, you answered one of my questions just right towards the end, which was around NSERC, which is the bottling company, as far as I'm aware, in Fermanagh. And just to be clear, you were pretty clear. Dare have reached out, had a conversation with NSERC, and they effectively don't bottle wine, so there's no impact.
I've confirmed that all their bottling for wine takes place in the GB plants.
GB.
Yeah.
Okay, it's fine. And the only other thing I have is just around, and it's not particularly regarding GBNI trade, but at the last time you were here and you were given evidence, you mentioned, and you picked it up again, in terms of the European Commission didn't conduct an impact assessment. I think you mentioned on the way through there that that was because of the urgency of this particular area to effectively get it done. I'll ask a question and you can tell me it's well beyond your scope to answer it, but I mean, how does the EU, sorry if it's a silly question, but how does the EU know then about the level of impact if it decides not to conduct an impact assessment? How does the EU know how that's going to affect people with whom this legislation will change how they do business?
So where they have a derogation to not carry out an impact assessment, they have to publish a staff working document that will look at the costs and benefits within 3 months of the publication, and that has been published, so the information's in that.
Thank you very much.
Yes, David?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your presentation today. Just one question, and it's around sort of the potential for differences around how low and no alcohol products could be labelled. And are we sure there isn't potential there for sort of consumer awareness and or safety issues?
In what way? Sorry.
Just in terms of if they're going to be, if there's the potential for them to be labelled here differently, in terms of how that looks. I mean, I'm someone with an alcohol allergy myself, though not particularly severe, I have to say. But I'm just in terms of if those labels are different here than they are elsewhere, is there any potential for confusion there of consumers?
So the labels are already different in Northern Ireland and the EU compared to GB. At the minute, the EU already uses the descriptor de-alcoholised, and GB haven't legislated on that. So there are already differences, and it hasn't caused any issues that we've been made aware of by our stakeholders.
Fair enough.
Thank you. Other members? No other members? Would like to ask any questions, so can I thank both Samantha Stewart and Samantha Swan for your presentation this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, under paragraph 8.1 of Schedule 6B to the 1998 Act, the committee must decide whether or not to hold an inquiry into the published replacement EU Act that has been notified. Should the committee fail to decide, the failure will be treated as a decision not to hold an inquiry. So having regard to the legal advice this morning on whether it appears likely that the replacement EU Act significantly differs in whole or in part from the content or scope of the EU instruments which it amends or replaces, and given the departmental assessment on whether it appears likely that the Replacement Act would have a significant impact specific to everyday life of communities here in a way that is liable to persist, can I ask members, do they wish to hold an inquiry into Regulation EU 2026-471? No? Thank you, members. Just to advise members that the committee's decision today will be published on its webpage. So we're just going to move on to item now 8 on the agenda. And it is COM 2025-993 proposal for a regulation as regards the simplification of technical requirements and testing procedures for motor vehicles. And we're going to have departmental evidence. Can I inform members that this item will be recorded by Hansard? And can I refer members to relevant papers at page 78 to 143 of your meeting pack? An assessment of impact from the Department for Infrastructure can be found at pages 140 to 143 of your meeting pack. An explanatory memorandum for the proposal has not yet been received, but when received, it will be included in a future meeting for members to consider. Can I remind members that in line with our agreed processes, departmental officials were provided with questions in advance to be answered as part of the oral evidence session. Officials were also asked to share their responses in writing before the meeting if possible, and these have been emailed to members this morning and a hard copy has been provided. So this morning I would like to welcome Caroline Hobson, Director of Driving and Vehicle Policy and Legislation from the Department of Infrastructure, Roy Kennedy, Head of Vehicle Policy Branch from the Department of Infrastructure, and Conor Murray, Deputy Principal of the Vehicle Policy Branch, Department of Infrastructure. So you are very much welcome, and if you want to come forward to the table, and just whenever you are ready and content, you can present to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to propose just to start with a general overview of the regulation and give sort of a summary of the GB's assessment of that,
Yes.
and then move into the questions and the responses that have been provided by DFT, if that sounds okay.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. Yep.
So the proposal for regulation for European Parliament and the Council, amending regulations EC 561/2006, EU 2018-858, EU 2144, and EU 2024-1257 of the European Parliament and of the Council as regards the simplification of technical requirements and testing procedures for motor vehicles, and repealing Council Directive 70/157 EEC and Regulation number 540/2014 of the European Parliament and the Council. So in terms of this proposal, so what the proposal contributes to the simplification of the regulatory framework for the automotive industry as announced in the Industrial Action Plan for the European automotive sector. It forms part of an automotive package which aims to boost the competitiveness of the EU automotive industry and the transition to zero emission mobility. It aims at simplifying provisions of automated related legislation, reducing unnecessary burdens and costs for businesses and authorities without undermining the protection of the environment and the safety performance of vehicles. So what does it aim to do? It aims to simplify and streamline certain provisions of procedures, including removing regulatory obstacles for the uptake of electric commercial vehicles, reducing the administrative costs related to Euro 7 emission tests, and improving coherence and avoid market fragmentation. So turning to then the specific proposals. So Regulation 561/2006 relates to the removal of tachograph requirements for electric light commercial vehicles. So GB assessment have advised that this is not a type approval issue and it's not included within the Windsor framework. Regulation 2018-858, this relates to vehicle categories and it introduces a new subcategory for small electric vehicles. The proposed amendment, it will allow the EU legislation to amend regulatory measures to this specific subcategory with a view to incentivising production and uptake of small electric vehicles. DB assessment then, they have indicated that the addition of this subcategory is to enable support for the uptake of small EV vehicles. It does not create divergence between GB and NI with regard to technical requirements for vehicles. EV charging as well. So this amendment introduced powers to allow the Commission to set requirements and communication interface between EVs and the charging infrastructure. Again, GB assessment. The addition of this power for the Commission does not in itself create any divergence between GB and NI with regard to the technical requirement for vehicles. Turning to Regulation 2019-2144, this relates to speed limitation devices. So this amendment removes the need for speed limitation devices on electric light good vehicles over 3.5 tonnes but less than 4.25 tonnes to bring them into line with the requirements for conventional vans with gross vehicle weight up to 3.5 tonnes. The proposed amendment removes the necessary costs imposed on vehicle manufacturers and enterprises purchasing such vehicles, slowing down the increase in the number of zero-emission light commercial vehicles. So GB assessment of this is that they recognise that this is to take account for the additional mass of the EV battery and makes them the same of equivalent N1 vehicles, which is light good vans up to 3.5 tonnes, which are not required to be fitted with a speed limiter. It is a requirement under GB type approval for these vehicles to be fitted with speed limiters, and this may result in divergence. Regulation 2024-1257. So this regulation is also known as Euro 7, and it covers the type approval of vehicles, engines and related systems and components with respect to emissions and battery durability. Amending this regulation is meant to remove the dedicated low temperature laboratory requirement. As such, removal will not compromise environmental standards which are ensured by the real driving emissions tests. EU recognised that the requirement to comply with the general emissions limits would increase the regulatory burden for vehicle manufacturers without any benefits for environmental performance. So again, GB have assessed this and indicated that as the vehicle specifications themselves remain unchanged, as a proposal is aimed to simplify test procedures rather than changing technical requirements such as emission levels, this does not create divergence between GB and NI with regard to technical requirements for vehicles. Regulation then number 540-2014. So this relates to sound levels and acoustic vehicle alert systems, AVAS. So this amendment aims to reduce the major source of noise caused by motor vehicles. It sets out noise limit values for the different vehicle categories, lays out the rules on labelling and consumer information and the development of AVAS systems for electric vehicles. The amendment repeals EU Reg 540-2014 and amends Regulation 2018-858 to rely on equivalent UN regs number 51, 59 and 138 instead, which cover the same technical requirements. Again, GB assessment, so the EU already accepts approval to the UN regulations as alternative and is phasing out its regulation to reflect increasing use of those UN regs. UK is signatory to the UN regs, so it will accept approvals to them and will continue to accept EU approvals, so there's no divergence between GB and Northern Ireland expected. I'll then turn to the specific questions that were raised by the committee.
Yes,
so, question number 1. So, the question posed was the Department of Transport states there is potential for divergence between NI and GB vehicle markets in relation to the exemption for electric N2 vans from mandatory speed limitation devices. It highlights the UK Government's commitment to a presumption of alignment with EU requirements. If divergence were to occur in this area, how would this impact Northern Ireland? So we approached the Department for Transport because this is a reserved matter. So they have stated that should divergence occur in this area, businesses in NI would have the option to supply new electric vans up to a gross vehicle weight of up to 4.25 tonnes without speed limiters fitted, whereas in GB, all new N2 electric vans would continue to need speed fitters limited. Businesses wishing to sell the same vehicles in GB would therefore need to ensure that speed limiters were fitted. If the GB regulations were updated in line with the UK Government's commitment to a presumption of alignment, this would ensure that the N2 vans with the GVW up to 4.25 tonnes could be sold in both GB and NI without the need to have speed limiters fitted. And just a bit of additional context, so currently in GB, goods vehicles weighing up to 7.5 tonnes are limited to the maximum speed of 60 mph in a dual carriageway. Vehicles above 3.5 tonne are further limited to a maximum speed of 56 mph via a built-in speed limiter with the intention of maintaining road safety. So the removal of the requirement to fit a speed limiter to the 4.25 tonne would make a marginal difference to the maximum speeds that vehicles are able to travel on. So they'll be able to travel 56 as opposed to 60 or vice versa. So DFT consulted recently on zero emission vans regulatory flexibility and an outcome report, and this was published in November 25. Speed limiters was included in this consultation. So DFT at that time recognised that the initial fitting of speed limiters, it may cost additional costs and may present barriers to adoption of people driving electric vehicles, vans. So during the consultation, the industry feedback found that drivers find a reduction in speed, maximum speed, frustrating as they're unable to pass HGV traffic because they're limited to the 56 miles per hour. However, DFT also found from the industry that the use of speed limiters do support road safety by reducing the chances of collision and reducing impacts in the event of collision. The consultation, however, concluded that DFT were prepared to consider the requirement for a speed limiter, but it wasn't proposing that as an outcome of that consultation. So if somebody was travelling in a small electric van in Northern Ireland, under this legislation there would be no need for a speed limiter. However, if they travelled to GB, they would have to install or activate a speed limiter.
That'd be for all traffic. So if you just went across on the ferry and you were delivering something, you wouldn't be allowed to drive on the road unless you had a speed limiter?
This would just be in relation to the small electric vans.
But we're supposed to be moving towards decarbonisation of electric vehicles.
Yes.
So if, let's say, a distributor goes across on the ferry, is going to deliver something to Carlisle or something like that, if he doesn't have a speed limiter, it's going to be illegal for him to drive.
If he's registered here,
Yeah.
in a vehicle registered here under our type approval, he doesn't need it. If he's registered in GB and operating under GB regs, he needs it. So going from here to there, they shouldn't need it. They come from there to here, they should have it because it's in their mandate.
So if he picks up a load in Carlisle and comes back, he has to have the speed limiter?
No, because he's registered here.
Right.
If he's registered here and a vehicle type approved for the Northern Ireland market, he doesn't require it.
Right.
But the GB are saying anything registered on their side will apply under MOT regulations and will need a speed limit.
Peter, yeah.
So it's a really interesting point, which again we're thinking along very similar lines. So it actually, Roy, it's where the vehicle is registered, not where it goes to, because it would seem, Steve just asked the question, it would seem that if you had a vehicle here and one of these N2 vans and you wanted to drive it to Carlisle, whenever you get onto the mainland, it becomes sort of illegal because actually it doesn't have the speed limiter which every other van in GB will have, because that's the context. But what you're saying is, as long as the vehicle that's coming from Northern Ireland is registered in Northern Ireland, you're absolutely sound that it will not be stopped by the police, and they'll say, well, where's your, going, 65 miles an hour, and they'll say, well, surely you should have a speed limiter. They don't have to have that. It's based on the registration of the vehicle.
Registration and type approval.
But they won't be allowed to go, because of the rules in GB, they won't be allowed to go over the mandated speed limit for those types of
Yes,
vehicles anyhow.
if you're mandated to 60 or 60 or 50 or whatever the case may be.
Okay.
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 It's less safe using the EU regulation. Okay.
Okay, Caroline, do you want to continue? Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry about that, sorry.
No, you're
Fine,
fine.
no. So question number 2 then. So committee asked regarding the Euro 7 requirements, and noting the UK government's presumption of alignment with EU regulatory changes, is there any potential for divergence between GB and NI? For example, if GB aligns with the EU scheme later than NI, how will this impact NI? So DFT have advised that if GB did not align with the proposed changes, then new vehicles intended for the GB market might require additional testing, not required for those sold in Northern Ireland. For example, the low temperature laboratory test before they could be approved. Vehicle specifications themselves remain unchanged, as a proposal that is aimed at simplifying the test procedures rather than changing any technical requirements such as emission levels. Therefore, businesses will be able to continue building the same specification vehicle for both the NI and the GB markets.
Yeah.
And just relation again to EU Euro 7 requirements, so just generally they build on Euro 6 and they will apply to all petrol, diesel cars, vans, lorries, buses. So Euro 7 is due to commence in the EU, including in Northern Ireland, in November 2026 for newly launched cars, and from November 29th to November 27 for all other cars and vans on sale. They must meet the standards or be prohibited from being sold to customers. So, as I said, Euro 7 it will apply on GB, it won't apply on NI. However, DFT are planning to consult this year on options for Euro 7 in GB. And again, the consultation, it will aim to align GB and EU type approval requirements.
Apologies, Caroline. Just so I get this right, so the UK or GB is adopting Euro 7?
EU are adopting.
EU's
Yes.
adopting Euro
Yes.
7. So here's a question. If because most people are going to buy their vehicles obviously in GB and bring them over. So if it's fitted with speed limiters and all the rest of it, that will be perfectly legally to drive in Northern Ireland.
If you're referring back to the speed limiter issue on the vans, on the electric vans, the EU regulation removes the mandate to have one. It doesn't make it illegal to have one on it.
Okay, so basically,
you can
you know,
still have
somebody's
one
going
if you want.
people here aren't going to buy vans from. They're going to buy them from GB,
Yeah.
and particularly sort of second-hand vans and that the rest of
Yeah.
it. So providing so when they come across with speed limiters and all the rest of it,
Yeah.
they're going to be perfectly legal to
Yes,
drive
absolutely. Yes, and GB, as part of the type approval process, they have to have the speed limiter. So yes, if they come across here, it may simply be a case where they don't turn the speed limiter function on. But yeah, there's no real technical difference.
And
to
I
the
mean,
requirements.
I know they're talking about EV vehicles, so they're talking about
Yes.
sound
Yes,
and sort of
yes.
sound decibel level and the rest of it. Like, I
Yeah.
can't imagine a GB vehicle would fail a test here in Northern Ireland on sound, would it?
I can't believe they're made any differently.
No.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking. So I was just thinking, okay.
Yeah.
Right, Caroline?
By
I'll
balance
turn
and
to
everything.
question 3 then, with regards to what are the implications of not applying the proposed EU Act and how would this affect businesses in Northern Ireland. So again, DFT have advised that if the UK refused to consent to the regulation applying in Northern Ireland, the type approval requirements for Northern Ireland would likely differ from those in EU. NI businesses might find that vehicles approved in the EU are therefore no longer approved in Northern Ireland. Vehicles may need to undergo an NI-specific type approval process to be sold in Northern Ireland. I think it's very important to recognise that on the 18th of December 2025, DFT confirmed that it intends to legislate to mandate that vehicle placed on the market in GB must hold dual GB and EU type approval and marking, enabling their sale in both GB and Northern Ireland. If there's not a clear commitment from industry, that will make this a default position for vehicles sold in the UK. So a call for evidence on the approval and marking of road vehicles placed on the market in Great Britain was launched on the 18th of December and closed on the 12th of February. So we will continue to monitor, see if there's what the outcome of that consultation is. And in the meantime, the government continues to urge manufacturers to dual approve vehicles to ensure a consistent regulatory landscape across the whole of the UK. And again, the UK government remains fully committed to supporting the motor industry across the whole of the UK, recognising the vital role it plays in our economy. So,
On question 3, I ask, are we aware at this stage, in terms of these vans or vehicles generally, if not in these vans, what percentage of cars on our roads have come from the EU?
no, we haven't, but we have been engaging with DFT to try and get some figures around that matter, because we're unclear about, and I do know that uptake is low at the moment. And I know within the UK as a whole, we've signed up.
It would only probably be one. I mean, you've Cyprus and Malta, but you're probably only going to come from the Republic of Ireland for the most part, given that they're
electric
the same side driving and so on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Relative to the rest of the EU, so I'd imagine it's going to be a relatively small number.
Yeah, we would anticipate that, but again, we've asked DFT to clarify some figures, and I was just going to allude to. So we have the UK as a whole, including the Northern Ireland Executive, signed up the zero emissions vehicle mandate. Yeah. So there is targets within that. So I think it's by 2035 that 100% of the small electric vehicles
will be sold.
Yes. So this is all really to incentivise and encourage that.
Yeah, no, that's great. It was just in terms of obviously this question is aimed at for our consideration is almost a disincentive to sort of not applying it, and therefore just to understand whether that is actually a meaningful impact or not. It doesn't sound in itself like it would be significant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Last question then. Question 4. What engagement has the Department for Infrastructure and or the Department for Transport carried out with stakeholders on the proposed EU Act, and what views have been expressed? So again, ourselves in DFI, we've engaged and been continuing to engage with our DFT counterparts in relation to this proposed regulation, provided input to the drafting of a UK government explanatory memorandum. DFT has not yet consulted with stakeholders on these proposals. It was the intention that a final EM would be in place by the 2nd of March, but that has not been finalised. We've been engaging with DFT around that, so our understanding is that that's not as yet been finalised.
Can I ask a spottery sort of question? Obviously, when we talk about 4.5 tonnes, are we talking about Ford Transit vans or slight?
About a van that will look like a Ford Transit, standard Ford Transit, but it will have a maximum weight of 4.25 tonne to allow for the extra weight of the battery over your normal diesel engine. So you're not going to get any more extra load in the back. It's to allow for the actual running.
The vehicle's heavier.
The vehicle's starting off heavier.
Have we touched base with Amazon, because they seem to be the biggest users of those around in Northern Ireland at the moment?
They're probably using an electric vehicle that's below the 3.5 tonne, which then, because a lot of the Amazon vans is filled with boxes of, if you ever get a box from Amazon, sometimes there's a tiny thing in a big box. So they're carrying a van load of air, so they don't need the weight.
So it's the all-up weight we're talking about?
Yeah, so they're maybe on a van that's not going over the 3.5.
And just in relation to Amazon, I do know that when the EU were bringing forward these proposals, they had extensive engagement at EU level, and Amazon was one of the ones that were included in this engagement, or they were one of the stakeholders they consulted with.
Okay. Thank you very much. Every day is a school day, as I say. Yeah.
So I have Jonathan and then Cathal. Yes, Jonathan?
Let him in.
First time Johnny's been silenced.
No,
It's not.
we have the
it's
same
not
problem.
Oh, there's an
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't know how to lip read. I can't get in. Anyway, thank you very much for your evidence. I suppose a lot of this has sort of been triggered by some of Steve's questions, and in other considerations in relation to type approvals, EU Type 7, or indeed other, whether this is speed limiters or EVANs. A lot of it's based on the premise that the UK government will regulate in the same way. And why that fills me with no confidence whatsoever, that if it wasn't for the actions of our own dealerships, particularly in the second-hand region, we essentially would not have been able to flag some of the issues that they foreseen coming down the road whenever it came to issues in surrounding supply chains in particular. So that's why I would have concern in this, particularly the creation of a new category for small e-vehicles, because it opens the realm then for further divergence in the future. So I suppose probably my question is based upon the issue around the supply chain itself. Given that many of these vehicles, and indeed in this case the vans, are sourced from GB, I know quite a number that source them from that point. What does the supply chain look like if something like this went through? Particularly whenever you're delving into those particular stockpiles in broader England, Scotland, and in the Northern Ireland market.
Take that one? To be honest, it's kind of hard for us to say because we don't understand clearly the supply chains of dealerships. You mentioned used vehicles. It shouldn't affect the sale of used vehicles because this is just type approval standards applying to new vehicles. Once it's used, it can be sold freely in both jurisdictions. I think, as it's a reserved matter, we can't speak in great detail about the potential impacts, but we have mentioned that DFT have just closed the call for evidence on mandating dual marking, which means that any new vehicle made for the UK GB market would also have to be dual marked for EU. So that, if it were to go ahead, would potentially negate any impacts, any supply chain impacts by potential divergence in type approval standards.
If I can add further to what Conor has said in terms of the dual marking, so I mean we weren't aware of it, but obviously we had recognised the press and the interest on the matter before Christmas. So on the back of that, we had actually reached out to DFT and engaged with them to say, listen, we're very concerned, consumers over here are very concerned about this. And I suppose that sort of, resulted mainly, I think, as to why DFT went out and held their consultation around the dual marking, because we had been actively trying to identify what is the issue here and flag those concerns. As like Conor said, we don't really aware of the supply chain. So I would say, we were aware of that issue. While we're not over, we understood the implications, and on the back of that, we did raise and did the best that we could, which has resulted in a consultation, which hopefully, well, it appears should have a positive outcome for dealerships, in the sense that what GB or DFT have said, that if they're not basically voluntarily going to agree to have the dual marking, that they're going to mandate it through legislation. I would also highlight as well, the continued line from DFT is around the presumption of alignment, and they are keen to work, to make sure that the UK as a whole, the trade market isn't impacted. And just about your point about the new category, yeah, totally take that on board, and I think GB recognise that there is a risk that the EU may introduce this new category for the small vehicles, and that may result in them bringing forward further legislation in respect of that. They're aware of that, but I suppose it's a case of when that happens, they will consider it. So,
Jonathan's
you're
looking to get back
Jerry.
in again there. I've lost Jonathan's.
Sorry, Chair, I have no ability to unmute myself. I think
You're
I was
fine. You're fine.
No, thanks for that. I think it goes to the heart of where the confusion is among the industry, because the offer is, look, we can sort this out for the longer term. GB is going to regulate in the same fashion, but we have seen that we have no certainty on that. And to be honest, we need to think long term. Our dealerships are crying out for long term planning. They operate in a more longer term basis, and one of the issues that they raised at the time in relation to the other regulations were that, even the very fact that you can be offered the assurance that, look, this only applies to new vehicles, and therefore after that, it doesn't apply. But they were making the point that actually put them at a competitive disadvantage with their competitors in GB and other places, because of the offerings that they could then supply. And I just am not convinced that the introduction of regulations such as this is in the best interest of, number one, our consumer, to give them the best possible choice, and also the support of our local businesses. So I know you can't answer those particulars, but I just see a real difference here that could develop, which ultimately will impact consumer choice in Northern Ireland.
Jonathan, Cahill?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for your responses. Just following on from Johnny, because Chair, I better declare I'm a member of the DFI committee, and I'm wearing both hats today because I'm mindful now of some of the changes, because we engage with the EV sector through the DFI committee. And I'm just wondering, you're saying there's yet to be, the stakeholders yet to be consulted. Probably my question is, on behalf of the committee itself, and the Chair's not here, sitting here at the minute, what challenges are going ahead? When can they find out, or when will we know exactly the challenges are going to have? Because no doubt the sector will sit in front of the committee at some point, and they'll be asking questions. They have engaged on some matters, but maybe not particularly this, and just a kind of a time frame on primarily from a DFI point of view.
yeah, I think it's an ongoing process, to be honest. We have regular engagement with our DFT colleagues, and I know there's other divisions within the department would deal with more, matters related to the electric. So I can't talk, but for example, we've decarbonisation team and that,
Yeah.
So I would anticipate that there would be more engagement there, but I think it's difficult to say. But what I would say is that this EU legislation that's being brought forward, it is very much aimed at encouraging the uptake, because I think there's a recognition, and again, like it was in January, I think, where our executive signed up that ZEV mandate, and that was with the acknowledgement that the uptake was very, very low. So I think there's a real, and just within the wider, field of climate change and everything, I think definitely there's a commitment to doing it. But unfortunately, we can't give times, where we continually look in the department to see what we can do, to help that situation. So.
Oh, no, appreciate it. Thanks, Chair. I know it's going to come at us at some point, but thank you very much for your response. Thank you, Chair. Yeah.
David?
Thanks, Chair. No, it was just on the not being aware of the sort of supply lines and so on. Is that an argument for sort of greater consultation or engagement at a local level with some of the dealerships and so on to try and better understand that and what the impacts might be, or do you think that's sufficiently picked up by DFT?
I think we always encourage greater engagement with the public commercial sectors. Obviously, there's an element of how much will they want to share with the department. Some of that's going to be commercial in confidence and things like that. But we're always open to engagement, formal or informal. So it's something we will consider.
I'm not looking to trample you on the hook here, but are you saying that that's the main reason why you don't have that knowledge is because the dealerships wouldn't be willing to share elements of that, or is it an element, to be honest, that there hasn't been that engagement around those issues? I understand there's a reserved.
I'm not saying it's a
reserved issue.
It's a reserved issue. Yeah.
No, I do understand that. I think this is something we constantly deal with a committee where I think, and to be fair, DFT seem to be more engaged in this one than others have at other levels. But I think we've always made the argument that whether an issue is reserved or not, that really our local departments are the local gatekeepers, the relationship holders in country, and therefore the people that we rely on, as you know, in terms of evidence. So I think all departments, and it's not is that we need to be more proactive in that, and if there are gaps in our knowledge, we need to be reaching out. I don't suggest that huge resource goes into it, but some discussions had with those dealerships maybe to understand those issues that we know might arise, and that's the only point that we would make around that.
We're happy with that, and we're happy then to feed anything back to DFT to make sure that is considered as part of the process.
We understand it's a constant sort of grey area or tension, I guess, with this committee is that we rely on advice from departments that don't technically hold the responsibility, but nevertheless are the gatekeepers of those relationships locally. So that's the only point I'm coming with. Appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
All our members indicated any questions. So just on behalf of the committee, can I thank Conor, Roy and Caroline for your presentation this morning. Thank you.
I now know more about fans and electrics than I ever did before.
I'm just going to put to the members, do members wish to monitor the progress of the proposed regulation COM 2025-993 as it progresses through the EU legislative system?
Yes. I say yes.
Okay, thank you, members. So are members content to make the usual requests to the department and of raise in line with the committee's agreed procedures?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, members. Members should note that the committee can decide to hold an inquiry at any time into any proposed replacement act that it is monitoring. So I'm now going to move on to item number 9, which is COM 2023-411, proposal for a regulation on plants obtained by certain new genomic techniques and their food and feed. And can I refer members to pages 162 to 182 of your meeting pack? Members, at our meeting on the 29th, the committee noted a status update from RAISE confirming that the European Parliament and the Council of Europe, or Council of the EU, had reached provisional agreement on this proposed EU Act. The committee agreed to request updated assessments of impact, including specific requests for information on a number of issues related to the proposal. An updated assessment of impact from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs can be found at page 162 to 173, and this includes an annex at page 171 with answers to the committee's specific questions. The department remains of the view that both applying and not applying the proposed EU is unlikely to have a significant impact on the everyday life of communities here in a way that is liable to persist. An updated assessment of impact from the Food Standards Agency can be found at page 174 to 182. Its view remains consistent with its original assessment of impact from April 2025, which stated that the proposed regulation may potentially impact the scope of the existing GMO legislation which applies here. Can I inform members that a response from the British Government to queries raised by the committee is outstanding, and this item will be put back on the agenda when that response is received.
Great.
The European Parliament's vote on the provisional text is expected in May, so the committee is likely to be notified of the published act thereafter. Okay. So in the meantime, are members content to note both updated assessments of impact?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, members. Move on now to item number 10, COM 2025-994, 1020, proposal for a regulation as regards the extension of certain data protection periods. Can I refer members to relevant pages 184 to 194 of your pack? Members, at last week's meeting, the committee considered legal advice and departmental oral evidence on this proposal and decided to monitor it. During oral evidence, the Department for the Economy official committed to providing an updated assessment of impact once the EM was made available. The explanatory memorandum can now be found at pages 184 to 189 of your pack, and the updated assessment of impact is at page 190 to 194. Are members content to note both?
Yeah.
Yeah, content. Thank you, members.
Chair, through that.
Yeah.
This is going to be there's a lot of complexities in this, and I think until we actually see the full detail, we're not really going to be able to make much head.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can do it until we've seen it. So,
Yes,
Peter.
yes, Peter.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much, Chair. Just to note on that one, the sums involved, which are fairly sizable, you know. So, yeah. No.
Thank you. Noted. Item now number 11, committee notifications. Oh, you're right. Just to remind members that the Easter recess is from the 28th of March to the 13th of April, with Easter Sunday falling on the 5th of April. The committee has in the past worked on the principle that it only meets during periods of recess when there is a statutory business to be conducted and statutory timelines apply. Can I ask members, are they content to request that notifications are paused on the 2nd of April, the week before Easter, to avoid meeting to make decisions on Thursday the 9th of April, which is Easter week? Okay. Also, if necessary, any inquiry timetables will be drafted to avoid meeting on that day. So, is members content?
Content.
Okay, thank you, members. Can I inform members that the clerk will write to the British Cabinet Office to request the pause and inform the relevant people? Members, the committee may still need to meet on Thursday the 2nd of April to consider any notifications that might be received on the 26th of March. The Secretariat will keep members informed. Also, the committee's agreed approach and procedures on substitute members was circulated on Monday past, and I would ask members to pay attention to it. Okay, members? Thank you. We'll now move on to item number 12, and it's committee travel. And can I refer members to the travel proposal for the committee's visit to Brussels at page 197 to 202 of your meeting pack. I'm going to invite Chris to speak on that. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So members might recall that not last meeting but 2 meetings back, the committee agreed that I would explore members' availability for a proposed visit at the end of April, and most members have since indicated that they would have availability for a visit departing from Parliament buildings on the afternoon of Monday the 20th and returning on the evening of Wednesday the 22nd. As the Chair has noted, you'll find at page 197 the proposal itself. It's been through the usual internal approvals and now requires committee agreement to proceed. The proposal contains information on the purposes for the visit, rationale for our intended timings, and our list of stakeholders that we'll seek to engage with. Those details are all reflective of what we've discussed and agreed already on a few different occasions, before Christmas at our informal meeting and 2 meetings back again when we discussed this. So I won't rehash that information for now, but I'm certainly happy to take any questions on those elements at the end. I do want to speak briefly about some of the practicalities of the visit, though. The first thing just to note is that the accommodation that you see in the proposal there is subject to a slight change. That's due to just the speed at which hotels book up ahead of plenary and committee weeks. But we will be using a similar hotel and location, and you'll see that we've taken on board a bit of the feedback from previous visits about working to try and secure a location that's in close proximity to the institutions where and when that's possible. Similarly then, on that same note about things booking up quickly, provided that the committee is content to approve the proposal today, we as a Secretariat staff will look to move quite quickly to secure those bookings and maximise value for money. So if everyone's content to proceed, at the end of this meeting, I'll hand out our usual travel forms just for signature. It's just a short form for completion. I'll pass them out to all of those who had indicated that they're either available or had sort of tentatively indicated that they were available. And if you're able to complete those at the end of the meeting and return them to me, that would just speed our side of things up. I know a few members might have to go away and reconfirm their availability before we sort of hit the button on those, but we can hold on to the forms and just process them once that has happened. So if members are content with that, I'll just pass the forms around at that point and get them signed off.
Do we have to pay for our Estes or EU Estes?
We didn't as of the last visit.
Oh, it's now been introduced.
I'll double check the arrangements for that when we're working through.
My Irish passport's expired, Cahill, just in case you're asking.
Steve, I'm okay, mate, but work ahead there.
You were going to ask
you
that
work
one.
ahead there. Whoever
My Irish passport's expired.
Whoever
Not be back in time.
there on the rest of the group over the table. I'm okay, right?
I know I was getting fussed there,
You know,
wasn't it? I didn't realise.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, mate, you
no,
did
it's
ask.
about that's 10 quid or something like that. I can't remember what it is, but just we might
that
have
is
put that in
10
the
pound,
cost.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's getting pay rates, all right.
Oh, why? That's right. Yeah.
I'll double check the procedure on that before.
Yeah.
before
I can't
we
remember if we
process.
have to use them or not, but because it's technically business travel, I think we
ETA,
probably
we will.
have to. Yeah.
I don't think it needs ETA.
I've just had confirmation. Shelley, who's our logistical guru, some of you will remember from the previous visits,
That's right.
confirmed not needed for this visit. So that's
Excellent.
already
Happy
been
with that?
checked
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
So
We'll rush before you while you're the EU queue. Cahill,
It's the
excellent.
travelling Irish. It's okay. It's the travelling Irish. Okay, Peter, don't take it.
We'll be the other side. We'll be in Brussels
Travelling
while you're
Irish,
still sitting in the queue.
the only other thing I'll add, just for Jonathan's purpose online, those who are online or absent, we'll sort the forms out with you folks in the coming days. With that said, the Chair, I'll stop and see if there's any questions on the proposal itself and if members are content.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah, Chair, I have no questions on the proposal. I think, I know I'm down as a possible estimate. I think it's just in terms of being away with family for 3 days is going to be a little bit problematic for me. So I think it's probably unlikely I'll be going. So you could probably factor that into the logistics of it all. But yeah.
Thank you, members. So members are content then was to approve the travel proposal as outlined by Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chris. So we'll move on now to item number 13, committee work planning. Refer members to the work planning documents, page 204 to 212 of your pack. Are members content to note?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you,
Yeah,
members.
just to the Chair, there's a lot coming down the track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will be weekly.
Yeah. Do we, just on that, Chair, obviously we're relying an awful lot. That was a good session we had with DFI today. We don't normally, sometimes we don't get good sessions, but that was a good one.
Yeah.
Maybe just if the clerks could put out a note to the normal people we do, particularly in Derra and the rest of it, and just let them know that there's a lot coming. So, yeah, they're going to be busy.
Yeah. Yeah. And yes, everybody's content with that. So move on now to item number 14, correspondence. Can I inform members there's 7 items of correspondence on pages 214 to 257 of your meeting pack. Do members have any comments on items 14.1 to 14.7? Are they content to note the correspondence?
No.
We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Content to note. Thank you, members. Chairperson's business. Just to remind members that myself and Deputy Chair David Brooks will meet with Senator Mark Daly of the Senate and Chair of the Senate Select Committee on EU Scrutiny and Transparency, and that'll be later today, I think at 12 o'clock. Senator Daly just wishes to discuss the committee's work, and a note of the meeting will be provided to members in due course. Yes, Steve?
Apologies, I should have made a declaration of interest. I asked Mark to get in contact with you. So Mark and I have been working for years on various north-south issues and the rest of it, so I asked him to get in contact with you. So just in case, I just want that on the record, that if he it just sounds as if he sort of appeared out of nowhere. I think he was asking a lot about the Windsor framework, and I said he should talk to you.
He wanted to meet with me.
Absolutely. You spoiled the thunder there, Steve. Especially David. David was going, my God, here we go here.
Oh, thank you for that, Steve.
Pass
That's
on
fine,
my
yeah.
regards to Mark.
We will indeed. We will
Yeah,
indeed.
cheers.
So item number 16, any other business? Do members have any other business? No? Just we'll move on then to item number 17, date and time of next meeting. So next meeting will take place on the 12th of March at 10 a.m. in room 30 in Parliament Buildings. Okay, so thank you, members, and that's the meeting adjourned.